information. And then after that, I want us to look at some of the personal relevance it has for us. Because we should walk away from worship service excited every week. Even if we hear hard messages about sin and stuff, we leave each week because we remember Jesus rose from the dead. That changes my whole life. So one of the things that we think about is all the evidence for how Jesus rose from the dead. Now I want us to put on our critical thinking hats. I want us to think, did Jesus really rise from the dead? Because the question is, if he did, then he is the Son of God. Everything he said is true. But if he didn't, he is the greatest manipulative con artist of all time. He can't be a good man, like a lot of people claim, and not rise from the dead. Because then he would be a liar. So what evidence do we have? And this is one of the things that people, when they start thinking critically, they start thinking, I know without a shadow of doubt Jesus rose from the dead, so that's why I'm going to change my life. A lot of it's about people think, well, you just read it from a Bible. Well, the Bible is one of the most historically reliable copies of manuscripts that we have. And when some of the scholars that look at it, even those who aren't religious by nature, they test the credibility of the Bible and its historical reliability, they constantly come back and say, it has to be. There's too many evidences for it. You believe in Julius Caesar? Yeah, you do. You believe he conquered? Guess what? There is a lot more manuscripts that are older and more vast in nature in the Bible about Jesus rising from the dead than there is anything about Julius Caesar. Or all those different things. And now a lot of people look at some of the evidence and I often point, well, what about the empty tomb? You see, one of the evident pieces of evidence that people like when I do a Bible study with them is I ask them, what's the greatest piece of evidence in a court of law? And often they say, well, eyewitness testimony. And I say, that is absolutely right. One witness, well, you can create reasonable doubt. 2 witnesses, 3 witnesses, 4 witnesses. Every time you increase, you get more and more credibility. Well, the Bible tells us that over 513 people saw the risen Savior at the same time. What kind of proof does that give? But okay, let's even say that. Some people say, well, they have a reason to lie. Okay, let's get back to the scene of the crime. Let's go to that empty tomb. Let's look at how the tomb was empty. I mean, even when the gospel writers talk about how he rose from the grave, they looked into the tomb and they saw the burial cloths there with the head napkin. They would wrap someone up in linens and perfumes and all these different things, and it would be heavy with all those strips of linen covered in fragrances and lotions. But when the gospel writers record how the body was, they saw this mummified figure and it was collapsed. Because there was no body there. Because if a body was there, it would hold up the linens. But because it was collapsed, it shows that shell was empty. But not only that, the head napkin, they would wrap a head napkin around the person's head. But that was separated from the linens of the body, and it was folded neatly. And so that kind of shows, obviously the body's not there. How did he get out of that, those linens? And how is it collapsed? Okay, now let's say that's not even convincing. What about the empty tomb? Where's the dead body of Jesus? And this is where the question comes in. And this is the one that really gets people thinking. Because obviously, if Christianity could have died on the 4th day, right? Jesus predicted 3 days, I'm going to die and rise again. I mean, the Old Testament scriptures, which is another evidence that predicted that Jesus would die and rise again, Jesus died and rose exactly like that. So you got all those messianic prophecies. So that's another evidence. But on the 3rd day, he was supposed to rise. Well, on the 4th day, if he didn't, they would take out the dead body of Jesus and say, here he is. He was a liar and a con artist. Christianity would have died that day. Why is it that it didn't? Why is it that they didn't bring out the dead body of Jesus? Because there was no dead body of Jesus. Because he rose from the dead. And I often ask people, and during Bible studies, I said, well, who could have taken the body of Jesus? Would it have been Roman soldiers? The failure to do your task as a Roman soldier was death. Do you think that they would have wanted to deceive people, especially when they were the ones who mocked him and beat him and crucified him, and they would want to glorify some Jew when Romans were very elitist in their thinking in regards to other nationalities? No, they had a personal reason not to let anyone steal the body. What about the Jewish leaders? They wouldn't have stolen the body because they asked Pilate to crucify him. They would have been the first ones on the fourth day to bring out the dead body of Jesus, and in Christianity that day. But why didn't they do it? It's because they couldn't. What about grave robbers or the apostles? People say, well, they have a reason to steal from the tombs. Well, the Roman soldiers were like Navy SEALs. I mean, think about it. The Apostle Peter ran away when they arrested Jesus. He ran away when a slave girl asked about him. And now you're telling me he was brave enough to confront Roman soldiers? Absolutely not. That's ridiculous. And they couldn't, even if they tried. These are the best trained soldiers. So in all those people, none of those people would do it. The Roman soldiers wouldn't have done it. The Jewish leaders wouldn't have done it. The grave robbers and apostles couldn't have done it. So what's the reasonable explanation? Jesus rose from the dead. The tomb was empty. Now, a lot of people often try to create, now a lot of smart people who trust in the reliability of the scriptures, but they don't believe in Jesus, they try to come up with a lot of good sounding arguments that try to prove why the tomb was empty and why Jesus' body wasn't brought out. I heard one person say, well, they got the tomb wrong. The apostles went to the wrong tomb, and they saw that it was empty. But think about this from a critical standpoint. Do you think Roman soldiers would be guarding the wrong tomb? This was a tomb owned by Joseph of Arimathea. Don't you think that would have been easily tracked down? And even if the apostles did go to the wrong tomb, don't you think the Jewish leaders would have went to the correct tomb and brought up the dead body of Jesus? Okay, so that's out of there. Some people say Jesus didn't actually die on the cross, that he just merely swooned, that he was brought into the tomb and he didn't really die, and then Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea took care of his wounds and then they snuck him out of the tomb. Well, that's a pretty good philosophy. That's a good idea. I don't know about you, but if I had my wrists nailed and my feet nailed and my side pierced, I don't think I'd be walking anywhere. I mean, I have a man cold and I'm put up for a week. And so people think about that. The medical treatment, he wouldn't have been able to do any of that. I mean, they come up with all these different philosophies for not believing. And I often ask people, because people often say, you believe in Jesus just because you want to believe it. Now, would any of us, if we were non-believers, and a Christian came up to us and they said, well, I just believe it, would we buy that? No? But we believe it because it's founded on fact, proven with evidence. It's the same logic. If we reverse the logic, we got to ask people, why is it that you don't believe? Look at all the evidence and tell me why you don't believe. And if you don't believe, tell me why the tomb is empty and what happened to the dead body of Jesus. Because for all the naysayers, they have to give us a reasonable explanation. If they just say, well, I just don't believe it, then it's the same thing of telling Christians, well, you just believe because you want it. Based on logic, based on thinking, what's the logical conclusion? You know, I'm a cynic by nature. I don't believe anybody. I don't trust people. I don't trust any of you. But my point is, I read the Bible and I think logically and think the only explanation is that Jesus rose from the dead. I mean, I got to really have some faith in something else and create some random Da Vinci Code type philosophy to really come up with an argument that actually sounds somewhat credible. But the thing is, I can't. I mean, I've tried. And I can't think of a reasonable explanation to prove that Jesus didn't rise from the grave. So what does this have to do with any of us? Okay, Micah, you've talked and you've given us good arguments. You've proven that. I mean, logic kind of shows that. What personal relevance does it have? Well, the first one is that the resurrection proves the deity of Christ. The resurrection proves it. I mean, Jesus didn't just claim to be a moral teacher. He actually came and made known he's the Son of God.